Good morning, everybody. Welcome back for the second day of PyCon Australia. I will be your MC for this session. My name is Russell, and it is my distinct pleasure this morning to introduce our first speaker in this block, coming in virtually from over the internet. Amanda Casari will be speaking to us about our dependencies, or our dependency on open source dependencies. Please make her welcome.
Hello again, everyone. It's a delight to see you, or not, because I can't see you, but I trust that there is a lovely audience of people in person because you have all come as a special guest of our friend Salty the Sea Otter here and her many friends. So I am excited to be talking today about navigating the murky waters where, hang on, I did that one already 48 hours ago. Look, Present, Amanda, I get it. You're here to talk about our dependency on open source dependencies. I'm super excited for you. You're forgetting one thing, which is this isn't my talk. So it's only the second slide. I haven't even gotten to the title. Here's the shameless self-promotion for the last talk. But I have added in multiple things of this. So it'll be a roller coaster. We'll have shameless self-promotions, shameless friend promotions, side quests. And it's a solid talk. All the extras exist because, like I said, this is actually not my talk. That's right. This talk was originally written and performed, presented by myself and your very own brilliant Nikki Ringland, who I hope made it to the room. It sounds like there might have been a slight emergency beforehand. If not, we'll be showing up and hopefully we'll throw popcorn and heckle me accordingly because this is V2.0 of a talk that we created together and gave at the Lesbians Who Tech Summit in June of 2022. Nikki was kind enough to allow me to shine it off and take it out for another spin with all of you today. For those of you familiar with the Australian program Bluey, it might be that this representation of ourselves as very specific adults on that show is all you need to know who we are. In case you are not one of those lucky folks, some context about myself. I am a pale white woman with light hair and eyes who wears glasses. I am a researcher and engineer at Google, where I'm currently leading a team focused on research and education in our open source programs office. I am using my nighttime DJ voice tonight because the last time I gave a talk, my kids complained that I was talking too loud. Hopefully that will not top in tonight. I'd like to let Nikki introduce herself, but since she's not here in the stream with me, and she might be busy in the audience with you, I get to make it all up. Dr. Nikki Ringland also works at Google. She was hired in the year 2137 to hire and build a team based on her groundbreaking research into human time travel for fun and profit. Unfortunately for Nikki, one of the scientists on her team forgot to carry a 1, causing her to lose all relevant memories as she came into the past, only retaining her cover story. Fortunately for us, future Nikki was kind of a selfish jerk who didn't believe in sharing, so no one else has been able to replicate her work on this timeline. Also fortunately for us, present-day Nikki is a wonderful human being who believes that credit is always best when shared freely and access to education and information is a human right. So my first shameless self-promotion and friend promotion and side quest are now all complete. For those whom it helps, you can find these slides with detailed speaker notes, which I may or may not stay on script to, at bit.ly, that's bit.ly/OSS-deps-RANBOWSNEK 2023-slides. I would like to begin by acknowledging and paying respect to the traditional owners of the various lands on which we meet today. I'm joining you from land which has served as a site of sustenance, community, meeting, and exchange among Indigenous people since time immemorial. The Western Abenaki are the traditional stewards of these forest lands and waters in Vermont, which they call Indakina, or homeland. We respect their spiritual and lived connections to this region and remember the hardships they've endured, both past and present, including violence and forced displacement at the hands of colonizing peoples. As we gather in this physically dispersed and virtually constructed meeting, as we share our knowledge, teaching, and learning practices, may we give thanks for the opportunity to share in the joys of this place where I am coming to you from and to protect it. So this is a talk about technology, We will be as human-centered as we can achieve, starting with our communal agreement that everyone here comes from different backgrounds and understandings of the concepts we'll be talking about today. The words we use may have a different meaning in your discipline or area of work. To get us all starting from the same meaning, we're going to spend a few minutes defining key concepts. Open source, when aligned specifically with software, has a very specific definition, which relies on the criteria governed by the Open Source Initiative. These have to do with access to source code and other musts and must-nots, which relate to distribution and authorship rights. You can learn more about these criteria at opensource.org/OSD. Next, we have a dependency. This is simply referring to when one piece of software relies on another piece of software. Very simple. Okay, next side quest. Sometimes that's true. The reality is this definition is oversimplifying things. So what we've got here is that a dependency of a package or a version is a separate piece of software that is imported by the package for the build. So let's say you want to use the Python package, matplotlib, to do that awesome data science project. So you import it. But to do that, you've got to install it. And when you do that, it automatically downloads and installs a bunch of magic for you. Hey, I'm sorry, what was that? Do that one more time. Keep going. Okay, I installed matplotlib. Cool. What's all this other stuff? Okay, that was the dependency I want to use. And it's installing its own dependencies. The thing is, each of these little progress bars were the other packages that were installed as dependencies of the dependency I installed. So here's your nice tidy dependency tree, right? Oh no, there's a vulnerability that's just been discovered in one of those dependencies. So an example of this is when the popular logging package that you were using, maybe log4j, had a vulnerability discovered. Yeah. So I don't know about you. Remote code execution was on your holiday wish list 2 years ago. Not for everybody. If you're lucky, the vulnerability is in one of your direct dependencies. That one little thing that you can see immediately. But if the vulnerability is in a package in an indirect dependency, something further down the tree, then your options are more limited. With log4j, it turned out that this case that was more than 80% of the open source packages on Maven Central used log4j. So some 16,000 packages were indirectly impacted. A surprise, this is also too oversimplified. That's not quite accurate. Chances are the dependency graph doesn't look like a nice, clear tree. Hope you're all ready. It's a dependency graph, and it might be highly connected. So that vulnerability, even if it's a direct dependency, is likely not only a direct dependency, but also an indirect dependency. If you want to find out more how much of a mess it is, here, my friends, is the second shameless friend, because Nikki wrote that section, second shameless friend promotion for another of Nikki's talks, explaining this even more in detail, especially around what happened with log4j. Time for more definitions. Let's talk supply chain. The concept of a supply chain refers to the people and processes for making and distributing a product, and it's often applied to manufacturing. A supply chain is a process of getting a product to the customer. Now here, like in the previous, it's not a tree, it's a graph, there is iterative reuse. One of a product supply chains is n number of products and n supply chains and an endless supply of turtles all the way down. Now, a software supply chain refers to the people and processes for making and distributing a software product. A supply chain is a process of getting a product to the customer. And in the software domain, we will focus on the software development process itself, which is, again, dependencies all the way down. So, a list of ingredients / bill of materials is another term used in manufacturing. A software bill of materials is a complete, formally structured list of components, libraries, modules that are required to build, like compile and link, a given piece of software and the supply chain relationships between them. So these components can be open source or proprietary. free or paid, and widely available or have restricted access. Wait, so why are all these fundamental concepts so important? Much of our modern technical infrastructure is built on and with dependencies from open source, which is great, right? There are obvious benefits when it comes to building with open source dependencies. We love open source. It's awesome for so many reasons. Very selfishly, it stops us from having, like selfishly as a developer, the person who wants to use it, it stops us from having to reinvent things that already work. It's fantastic. I don't have to reinvent anything. I don't have to do duplication of effort. I can use other people's work. It lets me be nimble and quick. Also, selflessly, there's a low barrier model for sharing your work with the world while maintaining control over your ideas. There's many versions of open source licenses that allow you to do the level of control and transparency and iteration that you want. Also very selflessly, science belongs to everyone. Like when there was the discovery of being able to see black holes, and those scientists were able to very quickly put out how they were able to image that using open source software, both for the explaining how the things were processed and then explaining how the science worked behind it, and then sharing the code and the imageries all at once in a lovely little packaged Jupyter notebook. It was fantastic. Also very selfishly, you get to share things as you work on it and get people's help along the way. So as other people see you work, if you have questions, if you have struggles, they can work with you. They can just see you struggle, because sometimes that's something that helps people feel better about themselves. But really, when it comes down to it, like being able to work in a public space in an area that you get to choose, can be quite hard to figure out if you're just building that from scratch. Having open source as a ready-made community is lovely for that. Selflessly, open source software can be a means, not the only, but can be one means to decentralize power and technology. Open source broke the copyright mold that only authors get to say who and how a copyright is used, which was the original reason and creation for it. So as part of the freedom and open source history, I think that we cannot ignore the fact that copyright law has been a central part of this along the way. When you build with open source dependencies, you also have to consider the constraints that are involved with being able to share things with the world under certain kinds of licenses. So one of these, again, selfishly, there are legal implications on what you can do with open source depending on the license it is released under. I say that this is selfish as well because, again, like from the person who is going and consuming it, you may want more freedoms than whatever the license allows you to do. But guess what? That's not your choice. It's the people who actually create and release the software who get to say what kind of license is used for it. What you use after that may depend on the license before that. This is why in open source, you still get questions about how things are going to change upstream or downstream. And there's a whole bunch of licenses that fit under open source that allow you to make those decisions. With open source software, again, other people see your work. This is the thing I said before that was great. Why are you saying it's bad now, Amanda? It's because it's a lot of work to maintain yourself in an open space, right? So if any of you have any inclinations like me, sometimes I turn into that little trash panda and I'm like, don't touch my stuff. Just leave it alone. It's there for a reason. I don't want you interacting with it. I just wanted to put it out there. Now, this isn't exactly the most inviting way. So from my perspective, putting things up where people use it, great. Putting things where people can see you, also not so great. Also, if you want other people to use it, they have expectations of you, even when you don't want to support them, right? So Log4j happens, all of a sudden, everyone starts calling you and saying, when are you going to be able to support Log4j? When are you going to be able to support Log4j? When are you going to be able to support Log4j? And you're like, look, it's holidays. I just want to go to the beach. I'm hanging out with my friends. But the reality is that other people are using your work. And other people are relying on your work. And at some line, there has to be there where people and their livelihoods start to depend on you in a way that you didn't anticipate and you may not want. So real talk, recognizing and setting your boundaries is not selfish. The level of transparency and access to your time is not something you may have signed up for. This is also why licensing exists, so that you can put things into the world, decide where it wants to go, how people can use it, but this is also where you can put communication into the world about whether or not you plan to be there if a problem happens. This is kind of the use at your own risk piece. Talking about risk, open source keeps changing. Not like last 8 months have been exceptionally high volume around any of that. But what we expect it to look like tomorrow, I mean, what I expect it to look like 6 months ago is not how it looks today, but that's also totally fine. So what it looks like tomorrow may not look like what it looks like today. More recently, we've seen a higher rate of systemic level security issues, which impact everyone using open source software. We've also seen a lot of movement from certain organizations to try to change what open source is, means, and could mean in the future based on what they want to call open source, because they're trying to take the term and go from something specific to something generic. The power in that is when you move from something specific to something generic, is the generic term means less, but carries all of the work and the weight that went into that specificity. So the folks who want to be able to use it generically and define their own boundaries are relying on that specificity to carry them forward in a way that both carries goodwill, makes them money, and also costs things from the folks who did so much in the specific area. I bring this up because we are forced to change previous ideas of what security and stability looks like even now. When you work with open source software, just like now, you are subject to all of the legacy problems, the known, the unknown, the known unknowns that open source legacy brings with you. So if you think that you could just do it better in 5 seconds based on understanding the problem, I can't wait to see you put that out into the world. The good news is that eyes on the code does improve security. However, I think that Linus's law is a myth. A strong belief still held. So like, many eyes make less bugs is not true. It's not true these days. Maybe it was then. It's definitely not now. However, by making sure everybody can see the work that's happening, it also means that things are open and transparent in a way that we can work on them together rather than waiting for someone else to sell us the fixes. Things are not improved when they are fixed. They are improved when we are committed, invested, and motivated to work on them together. As we said, people rely on your work. Happy holidays! You get an RCE, you get an RCE, you get an RCE. When things pop up, all of a sudden you have expectations that you have or have not set with people who will use your work to tell you whether or not you are available to work on them. If you work in industry and you have built on open source, you have a requirement to meet your customers where they are with those security fixes. If you are not being paid for your work, the same expectation isn't there. But this also means that corporations need to be working back into the world that they are not getting paid for and fixing things upstream and keeping the rest of the commons maintained, even if it doesn't help the market. Again, other people know you rely on their work. So a risk that can happen in open source that we have seen even more recently in the past few years is that people can take advantage of that. They can work deep in a dependency change to make changes, either to make a political message or to be able to affect vulnerabilities in a way that makes their work more visible because they want that visibility. I'm not going to bring that up here. We talk about that in another talk. There's also the problem that when other people know that you rely on their work, they can take advantage of that, being what we essentially refer to as toxic jerk faces who hurt people, but become the person who cannot be lost from a team. So we get rock stars and ninjas who become central to a movement when really they're just a jerk. That doesn't mean we can't change things. That's what we're all here to do, to change things. Speaking of which, this is one of the most lovely conferences I've ever been to, and I'm not even there. So thank you all so much. Like, you are a force of change, and I love you all. I hope you're cheering for yourselves, even though I can't see it. Please send me pictures. The ecosystem itself is much more than the codey bits that we call dependencies, and it's more than the code that you care about most. That's right. Okay. Second, third, fourth, shameless self and friend promotion. I lost count. So several of the examples I just talked about where things broke are covered in more detail by my talk with Julie Ferrioli, Black Swans of Open Source. This is different than Russell Keith McGee's Black Swans of Open Source from PyCon. I think that was in 2019, Russell. But both brilliant ideas, black swans lots of ways, all the way down, different concepts. Still, like this one here, go check it out. There might be a sing-along. There is a sing-along. It's recorded. Okay, getting back to talking about software as an ecosystem. Surprise, it's not just a graph. It's the OS and the build system and the package managers and CDMs. And then it's not just the OS and the build system and the package managers and CDMs. It's your OS and build system and package managers and CDMs and their OSs and build systems and package managers and CDMs and their OSs and build systems and package managers and CDMs. So like we said, all the way down, it's all the parts and all the bits. Even more, it's more than just the software. It's a system. It's a technical system. But there's even more parts you depend on that are not evident, even if you understand the gnarly graph. It's a socio-technical system, and that's not just a technical system of technical systems. People of all kinds, contributors, full-time employees, volunteers, unpaid labor, visibility, unvisibility. People write the docs, they organize sponsorships, they handle finances, they do the AV. Thank you so much, Patrick. You've been a delight to work with. There's people who are working in the room right now. I don't even know who everybody is, but I just have a shameless plug again that there are lots of folks who are working on lots of different things, and we should talk more about all of those parts. There's other work coming up for that. That's why Salty's there. It's a complex ecosystem of socio-technical systems. Again, when we start looking at all the work that everybody is doing, we also have to talk about organizations within this. We pay a lot of money to people who do a lot of things. We pay money to foundations, nonprofits, industry program offices, professional boards. What are they all doing? The government policy and regulation. What are they doing? So we have many ecosystems. A ecosystem, many ecosystems. And as a part of these many ecosystems, I just want to make sure I'm not going to be cut off too quickly, and I want to talk if you have talk. Ecosystems also have nutrient flows and energy cycles. So how do we translate this to practical applications? Well, you don't want you talking about core beliefs, Amanda. We're talking about open source software. So again, open source software, dependencies. There are things that we can do to take all of these concepts, which shape in my brain, Nikki's brain, all of my collaborators, and talk more about like how can we influence change and direct change in this area. I'm just going to give you 3 takeaways. 1, watch your software. So recognize that what you choose to use is going to have implications down the road. Watch your dependencies so that you can understand the organizations you're supporting by using that software with those dependencies. So what's an organization, Amanda? Well, in open source ecosystems, this could be large-scale organization and investment. Who's paying to maintain the things? Who's paying just to maintain a trademark? Also important, but for different reasons. Where's community scale organization and investment happening? Where policy change is being pushed for? When an organization is pushing for certain policy changes, either in regulatory systems or being able to push against changes in regulatory systems, what does that mean about the software that you're using and supporting that ultimately gets funded as part of that organization? When is it that organizations may put out messages about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but they don't actually do those things that they're saying beyond the report? When do they require marginalized people from their community to step up and demand change when that should be coming from the top? So again, great time. Promise last shameless self and friend promotion. Deps.dev, you can find out more about which projects depend on. You can dive a little bit deeper and understand who's writing that, where that's coming from, what's their affiliation, all good things to know. Also, who does the .dev? I will also say who does the .dev with Katie McLaughlin and Salty the Sea Otter, who is there in multiple places, is still very much a work in progress. This is the Across project that Katie and I have worked on together when we're doing research to try to make more visible the invisible work which comes and sustains open source. And if you have suggestions and want to join us, we'd love you. Okay, last part. Watch your ecosystems. Again, I can rant on this longer. We can talk about this more, but this is a complex interdimensional ecosystem. Interdimensional. Yes, there are many different dimensions in how we are thinking about this. So when I think about like complex ecosystems and sources and sinkholes, things that kill open source projects and communities, things that enable open source project communities, I want to help and put more food pellets into the system and less of the poison pellets into the system that are just like draining and causing things to die. So that for me is the like enablement versus like things that kill. So there are things in our control, there are things that are not in our control, but there are forces that are impacting both of those and trying to understand what is it that's enabling and empowering, what is it that's driving things down, stealing energy and time and people that we care about, and how we enact change on those. And it seems really hard, but I want to encourage you not to give up hope. In closing, I hope that today, as we talk about all of these things, we can break that mental model that simplicity is if we could just solve this problem. This comic gets brought up all the time because it's where people want to emphasize, if we can just solve this one problem, we can move forward in solving all the problems. But I want to emphasize that we cannot move forward effectively and sustainably to address dependencies on our open source dependencies until we break this over-reductionist model. Because in reality, this is closer to today's modern open source digital infrastructure. It serves as a reminder that there are more forces at work in the open source dependency ecosystem than the implied and under-resourced one person in a remote area. Those people do exist and we should look for them, but we cannot absolutely ignore the large-scale forces at work with staggering amount of global privileges, resources, and investments. Lots of money is being thrown around about these problems. Is it going to the right places? Does that money have accountability? How are they making that information most visible? How are they making it transparent? We cannot forget that moving forward, as we continue to examine who has voice, power, and access in these decisions, will impact us all. And if we aren't going to be the ones to ask for change for it, nobody else will. So I want to say thank you to Nikki, not only for your friendship and your collaboration, but for allowing me to revise this talk with zero oversight because I knew you were too busy anyways. Thank you, Katie McLaughlin, for bringing our dear Salty the Sea Otter and her many friends to the conference to become everyone else's friend, and for not giving up on our cross and ocean work, even when it goes into maintenance phase occasionally for months, years. And thank you all, PyCon Australia and Leslie, for allowing me to share time with you, even from many, many miles away.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Are you available for questions or?
Yes, if we have any remaining time, and if not, then I can be on Discord.
Time for one quick question if there's anyone in the audience who wants one. Okay, I will get one in just to make sure you're not left alone. You have mentioned this is obviously all the open source context. Not all software is open source. There's also closed source. Are these problems unique to open source, or the closed source just have them and we just can't see their underwear in public?
So I think that this problem is not unique to open source. We have obviously seen every now and then some very nice PR announcements come out from a company about how they're making strategic moves. Layoffs continue to be ongoing around the world in the tech industry. License change happens, regulation happens. All of these other things are still existing for the mixed world that is software technology and the modern infrastructure. And money moves in different places. So no, this is not unique. The fun thing that we get differently from open source is where we get to see components of it. But again, I think there's a lot of, what we hope we brought up in this talk is that there are a lot of mental models that people feel complacent in and fail to recognize where the challenges and the complexities lie.
Okay. Thank you very much, Amanda. Everyone, please, again, another round of applause for Amanda.